thank you, Cindy, for inviting me, and it's an honor to be with this group. I remember when it started out with a handful of people. So it's nice to see that it has continued and prospered. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history and so forth of the store and the family. Originally, the store was started in 1901, but it was across the street. And there was a house on the corner there where the store is now. And it was jacked up, placed on logs, and moved down South Main Street, and it still stands. I don't know if the Kerrs still live there or not, but there was, remember Clyde Kerr was in our class, well, that was his family's home. I'd also like to tell you a little bit about the forgotten brother, who was my grandfather. He and his brother Nur were born and they were raised in Center Mills. My grandfather graduated from Gettysburg College, and the family moved to Brooklyn, New York, where he was principal of a high school with a faculty of over 100 teachers. He also was doing graduate work at Columbia University with Albert Einstein. At that point, when the brothers decided to go with this store, he sent his brother Nur to business school in Lancaster, and construction began on this building, and it was completed in 1912. It was quite a building then, and even now it appears, especially when you're inside. Obviously it was well built because the original floors are still in place and being used throughout the building. There was no place where you could go like this and it bounced back on you. It was one of the first places in Upper Adams here to have electricity. They had their own generators. The second floor was for professional offices, and on that floor there was a tailor shop, a millinery shop. The first Penn State fruit lab was there. Dr. Dill, he was the local dentist, had an office. So it was quite, what do I want to say, a facility, you know, and used for the betterment of the people of the town. There also was a large hall on the front of the building, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes, but that was remodeled in 1948, and that was the last time a major renovation was done in the store. And at that time, Marion and Willie had their wedding reception on that hall there. And the third floor was known as Thomas Hall. It was one big auditorium, had a stage. They would have vaudeville shows would come through town. High school graduation was held there. On occasion they had donkey basketball. You know, you think about that, and someone said, well, it wouldn't have been too hard to get the donkeys up, but they would have been a little skeptical when they were looking down to get them out. So, it was truly not just a store, but it was a building for the community. The store was totally financed by my grandfather. There were no bank loans or anything that way. And he also saw to it that there was a house provided for Uncle Nur, Aunt Nettie, Marion, and Jean to live in. They were the sweat equity of the group. My grandfather was an active partner for 22 years, and in 1925 he sold his interests to his brother. And then later on, Uncle Nur, as we all knew him, decided to preserve and save the building and to look to the future, that he was going to sell the building to his two daughters, Marion and Jean. And the family folklore was that he sold it to them for $1 each, a kiss, and a promise there would never be a pool hall. And so from that point brings us on up to the modern time, until basically Marion's death, which was about 5 years ago, when a actual functioning committee and board of directors were met, and plans were decided on how to preserve the building and what to do. I'm not sure how Marion would be thinking about what we have done, because I think in her mind that the building would be kept exactly the way it was, and there was just no way that it could financially sustain itself that way. And so after much thought and discussion, we decided to renovate the upper floors into apartments, and we have 9. And believe me, they're very nice apartments, they really are. And the first floor would include a section of museum, and it's broken down into different segments. We have what I call the antique part of it, the products from the 1900s and so forth. We have a section, when we were going through things, we found a lot of products and so forth from the 50s and 60s. And so that will contain another section. There also will be a section of Eisenhower memorabilia in that part. We have another section dealing with the fashion. And then the final section is the hardware. And what is very interesting about that, in the mid-60s, the girls decided they didn't want to sell nuts and bolts anymore, so they just sealed that off. So everything was still there intact, and we will be recreating that in that part. The other portion of that first floor will be a gift shop. As to when we're going to be reopening, that's a good question. The apartments are ready for rent at this point. As far as the first floor museum and gift shop, it was supposed to be done in June, and then it was to be done in July, and then in September and November, and if we're real lucky, maybe December of this year. It just takes more time than you can realize to go through all the boxes and things. We had over 2 trailer loads of memorabilia and furnishings and 2 storage sheds. And so it's to go through all of that, and as to what we can use, what we should keep, how we can explain to the public the store and its purpose and functioning. Now, I told you that there was a hall or a meeting room on the 2nd floor where Marion had her wedding reception, but it was the home of the Fraternal Order of the Golden Eagles. And that's what I want to tell you about, because very few people know that there was a fraternal hall in that building. That particular organization was founded in Baltimore in 1876, and at the height of it, they had over 73,000 members throughout 26 states. It ceased operation in the late 1960s, and out of that, it expanded into what we know today as the Eagles. They sort of became incorporated together. The order's objectives were to help its members find employment if they became unemployed, or if they did not have a job opportunity within itself, they would retrain the person into a new profession. So in some ways, I think they were kind of ahead of their time, and that they wanted to see that everybody had work. In order to be a member of the Golden Eagles, you had to be Christian, you had to be white, over the age of 18, without any physical or mental handicaps, and you had to be able to write and support your own livelihood and so forth. The national organization was headquartered in Philadelphia, and the local lodges were called castles. Now, I'm kind of lucky in that I have a friend who lives up in Bellefonte near State College, and it just happens that his grandfather was a member, his great-grandfather was a member of the Golden Eagles. And so he has loaned me some of their memorabilia that the members would have had. This is just a picture of his great-grandfather, so nothing ordinary, they were just ordinary people. These are just, I know you really can't see them, but these were just little lapel pins that they wore. They also had, of course, as many organizations had their badges that they wore, but this was a thrifty bunch. Whenever a member of the group died and they had a funeral, they just flipped the badge over and there was their mourning badge that they could wear. For their basically everyday meetings and so forth, this was the cap that they wore. And when they had grand parades or meetings or so forth, this was the sash that they wore. And of course, they also, for special meetings and parades, instead of wearing the everyday cap, this was the fancy dude cap that they wore. And they also had a sword, which they would use for ceremonial occasions. You can see the scabbard is very unique and decorative, as is the sword itself. And his name is engraved into the sword. And this we don't know for sure, but we found it in the attic at the store. It's a needlework, and it certainly has fraternal indications with the hands, and it says, you know, friendship, love, and truth. So just sort of, we're taking a little liberty, but it just seems that it had to have been part of that organization, or else why was it, you know, in the store? The other thing that the Knights did, they were a very giving organization, and if somebody in the town needed help with something, they came in. And one of these was one of the members died, and the widow did not have the money to pay for the funeral, and they had 9 children. And this is an invoice from the funeral home that the funeral was paid for by the Knights. So they, you know, in addition to training people, they also, you know, helped with the those in need within the town. And that ends my part on the Knights of the Golden Eagles. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them, or about the store. And you're welcome to look at these things, just I ask that you don't touch them because they're getting to be very fragile. Yes.
What was the process when you started? Did you bring things out of the store and put them in storage, or?
Well, here's where we kind of goofed up a little bit. The powers to be at that point, and again, the initial thought was that Marion wanted things kept the way they were. Now, contrary, I can remember Marion telling me that in this process, before she was concerned what was going to happen to the store, and she got the bright idea that she was going to give it to the Eisenhower Society, since the Eisenhowers shopped there. And I said to her, they're not going to keep the store. They're not going to want it. They will sell it. And her comment to that was, David, with an attitude like that, you might as well go home. So I got up and I went home. They started off deciding, well, the first thing they'd have to do is empty the building, so they had numerous indoor yard sales, which was, in retrospect, was kind of a mistake. Only because as time went on and we met with architects and so forth, contractors, who came up with the plan of the apartments and so forth. In looking back, there were things that we sold at the yard sale that we should have kept. nothing major in terms of that, but, so our first thing was basically to get the building empty. And then, we went through the process with architects and contractors, and I should also say that the little brick building in the back was the original Biglerville National Bank, and that was formed in 1901. So once we came up with that plan and progressed, unfortunately, we ran into 2 years of COVID where nothing happened. And like everybody else, we could not get labor, we could not get supplies, and the prices soared. And so as a result of that, the cost for doing the project soared to an extra $1 million than what we had planned. Plus we also, lost during those 2 years the income which we had been planning on in terms of rentals and gift shop sales and so forth. So we got kind of hit with a double whammy. As of now, the apartments are ready for rent. I understand that 3 of them will be occupied on the 1st of December. If nothing goes wrong, we've run into some problems with some local and state and various roadblocks, I guess is my easiest way to describe it. But tentatively, the first tenants will be moving in on the 1st of December. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Dave, I'm Dick Unger, who was born in Biglerville down on South Main Street, and lived there until I went in the military. But when I was a child, it was unbelievable, those donkey basketball games. People just, when you tell them now about it, they don't even believe you. But when the donkeys were coming in town, I'd go uptown, cross the street, York Street or whatever, sit in the grass there, and watch them lead those donkeys up those fire escapes. Now, they had donkey shoes on, not horse shoes,
Right.
but they had donkey shoes on, and they blindfolded them.
Okay.
So they weren't so terribly scared. But a lot of people can't believe that, but that's really a good tale.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. I can remember as a kid, and I'm dating myself here, but frozen vegetables were just sort of becoming popular. And they had just a plain old chest freezer like anyone would have in the home. And above it was a blackboard, and they would write, Ford Hook lima beans, 20 cents, or, green beans and so forth. And so if you wanted something, you would tell them, and they'd root through this chest freezer to find it, so, you could have, with that. Yes, Dick?
But that one more.
Sure.
My family did their shopping there for everything, and particularly on Saturday nights they buy groceries, and then they deliver them down to the house. And Mother would send me up to the store quite often to buy a small incidental that she hadn't purchased. And I'd get that and say, put it on the bill. And so that's what they did. They had a running bill. And I thought after a while, that seemed like that could be some fun and some easy candy and chewing gum and potato chips. So I'd go into the store and I'd get some candy or whatever it was, and I'd tell Jean, I think it was at that time, put it on the bill. And so after about 4 weeks, I did this again, and Jean said, wait just a minute, Dickie. And I stood there as she went in, saw her go to the telephone, and she called my mother and said, Mrs. Unger, do you know Dickie's up here putting candy on the bill? And she said, no, she didn't, send him home. Then I paid for the can.
Well, I can tell you another one on the bill. My dad was a kid, and when he'd go to the store, he'd want a cookie. And every month there'd be 2 cents on the bill added for his cookie. And yet his father owned the store at that time. Also, when you mentioned about Jean, Jean was the very academic one. She was one of the first women to graduate from Gettysburg College. And both Jean and Marion had various collections that they had antique-wise and so forth. And over the years, I did learn a lot from them. But I don't think many people knew that Jean collected autographed first edition books. And one of her favorite was one from Carl Sandburg. Now, whatever happened to the books, I'm guessing that at the sale they were probably just thrown into a box. Nobody realized what they were. But she was very much the astute and academic of the two. Marion was very creative and very bouncy and so forth, where Jean was always.
Got them right, that's exactly how they were. Jean didn't put her hair up in a Christmas tree with lights on, but Marion did.
And I still have that tree. It needs new batteries, but other than that, I have the tree.
That was, everyone looked forward to seeing her hair up in that tree. What did you do with, I got a lot of clothes there. So what happened with a lot of those ladies' clothes that were upstairs? And I mean, there was gowns, we got gowns from there.
We kept a number of them. A lot of the brides' dresses went to a community theater up in Wellsboro. And surprisingly, they didn't want them for the dresses. They wanted them for the fabric, that they could, cut them and dye them and so forth. Then there was a young couple from the Philadelphia area that basically bought the remainder, and they were selling them, and primarily their bulk of their customers were from Japan that were buying these clothes.
Well, I will say though, Marion, red was not my color. Red was not my color. One time when I went, she said, I have just the dress for you. And any of you ladies who have been there know, you did not go where the clothes were. You sat in the room and she would bring them out and put them on. You felt like you were $1 million because she would lay them out in front of you with it. And when she brought it in, I said, it's red. And she said, I know, but you're just gonna love this. Well, I think that probably that is the dress that I got the most compliments of any that I ever had in my life. So, good eye there. That's what I told her. I said, honestly, Marion, I would have never picked that if you'd have put 1,000 dresses in front of me because it was red. But I don't know whether it was a design or what it was. But
And she had a sense.
yes, she did.
And
Yes, she did.
another thing that, maybe these are tales out of school, but when we were going through clothes and stuff, we found so many of the women's blouses and stuff had bows and things tied here. And I made some comment, and Dorothy Kuntz used to work there, lives up in Idaville, and she said Marion thought that the woman's neck was just unattractive and it should be covered, and that was why we did that. Also interesting, in the early stages of going through things, one of our professional consultants taught up at Penn State, and 6 of his students did an internship there at the store. And one of the interesting things, they would be there and I'd be sorting through and putting things in boxes. And there were boxes of brand new ladies' slips. These students had no idea what they were, how you wore them, or why you wore them. And then I said, well, if you think that, questioning that, I pulled open a drawer and here were girdles and corsets. And they had absolutely no concept what, the need for that was. It was kind of interesting. And any time they came across something like that they didn't know, I immediately put them in the keep box. You know, because I figured there are gonna be future generations of things that won't know what they were either, and I guess I'm kinda caught in the middle that I can remember my grandmother wearing a corset and that kind of thing, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
we try, my thought is not, sometimes what we choose may not what people think we should keep, or is necessarily pretty, or, you know, that, but my thought is to save and create things that maybe weren't practical or kind of odd, or why would you show these, but for the next generation. In other words, so, you know, these college kids didn't know, so I'm saying, well, my generation be the last that probably knew what they were, so that it's kind of important for us to, you know, preserve and keep these things and have them. The other thing too, I wanted to tell you that with the bank being next door, we have the screen, it was the teller's window, and that we have on display. We also have the iron gate with the lock one for the vault, and we will be having that on display. And we have some memorabilia from the bank that we'll be including. So that's another thing that we're trying to also include, various, you know, aspects of the store.
The building in the back, is that going to be something special?
It has been re-transformed or reconformed. It is now a studio loft apartment.
Oh, nice.
It's basically, it was just one room.
Mhm.
And there is a basement to it, and we found a bean pot down there in the basement, all full of shredded dollar bills. I mean, you know, like hay or something, you know, so who put it there, or why, or what, and why were they shredded, we don't know. But it was also interesting too, they had heated it, you know, one time with a coal furnace, and there were coal bin in the basement. And so for 5 years, well, not quite 5 years, but the beginning of this, each year at Christmas, I would go down and get lumps of coal, and I gave them to various people.
Handy.
I didn't receive one. I didn't receive one.
Consider yourself lucky.
American Pickers was there.
Mhm.
I watched the show when it was, and they only showed, you know, 3 or
Right.
4 things that they got. Can you share any of the things that they
Sure.
got besides the big shoe?
Sure. It was a day-long process, but what was interesting, it's a little different than what you see on the television. They arrived about 7 o'clock in the morning and looked at the building and so forth, and they said that the main entrance was too new. It was too well preserved, too new and stuff. And there was a building in the back that was like a warehouse, which has since been torn down. And that's the door that they wanted to enter in, because it was half falling apart and the floor was rotten and groundhogs came out and all of that. So once they determined that, then if you watch the show, how they show the van driving through the countryside, you know, and they pull up, well, then they left to drive through around, came back, and you know, we started with the sort of the way this was going to happen. And they would find something that they were interested in. And so we would have the discussion, and they would film it, and then they'd look at it. And then they'd say, now the next time, Dave, you stand over here, and you know, the others, and mention this when you're describing it or in your discussion. Then they would film it the second time, and depending on how that turned out, that would either be what they would use or they would go with the third time. The other thing that was kind of interesting, the two pickers, I would have just assumed that anything that they bought, you know, it sort of came out of a corporate fund or something, but it wasn't. They each paid for their own items that they picked. And the big shoe, and I've gotten a lot of static, why did I let that go? First of all, as in a lot of things in that building, they weren't necessarily in the best state of repair. And the sole of that sneaker was split, and if you didn't hold it right, it would flop down. And at the time, I looked at that and what they offered, and I thought, well, that's 4 months' heat bill. And so that was why I let it go. And plus, the guy that had it, he had 3 other ones in graduated sizes that matched it. So, you know, I thought, okay, I collect and he collects, so it wasn't like he was gonna sell it again. So that was why the shoe went. The other interesting thing that they wanted to buy, there was a display rack of hairnets, and they wanted to buy that. But that was where Mamie Eisenhower used to buy her hairnets.
Oh.
And so we kept that.
Another
Missed it.
One more and then I'll go.
Okay.
The boys around Biglerville decorated the square at Halloween. I don't know if people know that or not,
Mhm.
but we did. And decorated with everything. We had outhouses there. We had people's furniture, I'm sorry to say. We brought some trees in and put them in the corners and stuff. And we did this so much that the town fathers got upset with it and said, we're gonna stop this. And so they hired some guards that worked over at the Capitol. And they could stay all night and then get up and go to work. And so we got Donnie Heckenluber's dad's dump truck, and we filled it with all of our stuff that we normally did. And then we parked it in a alley up back at Ditzler's. And somebody went down to the square and signaled when the officers had left for their work. And so then Donnie drove it down the alley, up York Street or whatever, and when he got to the right place, pulled the handle, and it emptied everything out in the square again. And Marion talked a lot about this. In fact, she brought a bunch of girls from Wilson. Wasn't Wilson where she went to school?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She brought a bunch of girls over to her place to stay overnight the night before Halloween to see this action. And found out that that's when we all either had graduated from high school, went to military, college or something. So there was no decorations. She said, I brought these girls over here to see this, and there wasn't a thing.
Well, I can tell you a Halloween story of my generation. We had an outhouse that we put in the center of the square, and we wrote on the door, Mr. Hudson's office. And he was not at all pleased. But I can tell you too, one of Marion's parties when they were young, she had a adult pajama party and had it in the house, and she had beaded curtains in the doorways and these red lights and everything. And then for refreshments, my mother told me that she wheeled out this tea cart. Now I'm assuming you all know what a slop pot or slop jar was.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone know what I'm talking about? Well, in this tea cart, she had it all full of these slop pots and jars with the ingredients to make a hoagie. You know, onions in one and cold cuts in one and lettuce and stuff. And my mother just said she could not bring herself to making a hoagie.
2 phones is on our country store upstairs. I've been told what that meant, where it said, their advertisement that said they had 2 phones. My understanding from my grandmother was that they had a Gettysburg line and a Biglerville line, both there.
That's the first I've heard that.
Okay, well, it's on the sign, that was there. And cause she would come down and get, it was a dime, she said, to be able to call on the Gettysburg line, because she could call them Fairfield, and other parts that she had to pay at home on the Biglerville exchange, she had to pay for that as a long distance call, which cost her a lot more than a dime.
Oh, yeah.
And, so when I do tours up there, I tell people about that, and I didn't know if you knew anything more with it than that.
I
Because
can't,
that was really, I think it was extremely creative
Yeah.
and a very good way of making extra money.
well, you remember when, they went through the deal with hanging yellow ribbons on the trees?
Mhm.
And everybody was, in Adams County was sold out of yellow ribbons. Well, every night, Marion and Jean would take bolts of white ribbon that they had in the store, took them home, and in their kitchen sink, they would dye them yellow. And then they'd hang them outside on the trees to dry, so they were the only person that had yellow ribbons around. And another little tale on the telephone building, in the summer, they had like college gals would be working and so forth. And Majestic Theater had a contest every day. And they had some question, and if you answered the question right, you got 2 free tickets to the theater. So my father generally knew the answers to the questions, and so on Monday, he would get them and he would give the tickets for he and my mother for their date. And on Tuesday, the tickets would go to his nurse. Now Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, what he did was, the girls at the telephone building would jam the lines to get us going. He would tell them the answer, and then they'd have tickets for their dates for the weekend too. Anything else? Well, I invite you all, when you see that open sign, to stop by and come and see what we've done. I think you'll be pleased with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.